welcome back. Today I'm coming to you with an Orilium wrap-up. So Orilium is a magical readathon where you read books to study for classes to potentially lead to a magical career. And in the spring term there's one class per subject, and if you are an overachiever or someone who doesn't like to make decisions, you can do them all. And you can also be divided into what's called guilds. So I'm in the Archivist Guild, which are basically little support groups, and there's a book club book, and I didn't actually read the book club book, as you'll see later on, but it's all lots of fun. And then in the August or September there will be more prompts per subject, and depending, you can narrow down your career a bit more and decide which books you want to read based on what career you might like to have, or the other way around, which is how I do it, because that's how I approach studying. I did manage to read 14 books. They weren't necessarily exactly the books that I said, if not least because one of the books I said I was going to read turned out not to actually be released yet. So the release date was pushed out, so obviously I couldn't read it yet. And because I am cooking at the same time, I'm not going to be holding up a lot of books for you, but I will do my thing and I'll pop them down below and it will all be good. So there were 14 books for a total of 14 prompts, and I'm going to tell you what I planned and what I read. So the first was Alchemy, for a title in all caps. My plan was Legendborn by Tracy Dunn, which I did not read. I read Darkest Truth by Kirwan. This is the first in a crime series about a property lawyer who takes on crime cases. Someone has died and she gets a personal appeal from the parents to help them investigate, and it turns out there's a lot of investigating to be doing. This is partly because they think she's on the board of some film festival, and the film festival is tied up in why the person died, and then there turns out to be more personal reasons, and they're going after a famous person, and it's all very intricate. We read the second of this series and I really like that, and my partner even more so he bought the first and the third, so that's why I tried it. I didn't like it as much as the second, but I'm going to try the third anyway. I can't remember what the second was called. Okay, so the next was Animal Studies. For Animal Studies we were studying raccoons, and the prompt was Steal from a TBR, and I planned to read Water Moon by Samantha Soto-Yambauer, and that's just because it was my guild's book club pick, but I kept seeing people talking about Guava and Grudges by Alexis Castellanos, so I read that instead. This is a book about two rival baking families and a romance between the two children, two of the youngest generation of these two rival baking families. And there's a lot of guava and a lot of food and a lot of long-running rivalries, which of course turn out to be ridiculous, and it all works out in the end. It was fun, it was sweet, it wasn't a weighty tome or anything, but that's fine, you don't need that every time. Okay, next, Art of Illusion, book already planned, and I had planned to use my calendar book for this, but then my one of my library books came in and I was like, I have to read this month, and that was My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. And this is about someone whose sister is a serial killer and following her around cleaning up her messes. So it does exactly what it says on the tin, but it's quite sweet, and it's set in Lagos, which is like the centre of all like culture, and the food was amazing, and she had really good descriptive voice. So I found it very people were very believable and very visual. Like, I had a really clear picture of them in my head. The next was Astronomy, for which I had to spin a random colour wheel. I got the colour yellow, and I read Unmaking Mary by Chine McDonald. This is a theology book about motherhood and about how we've made a cult of the Virgin Mary to make her like an unattainable ideal, but actually if you go back to biblical sources, you come up with something a lot more achievable as a role model, as a hero, and you get to a lot more like both a better understanding of like how that works, about how her parenting works, but also a better understanding of how we as humans can be parents. And it was really sweet and really lovely, and I'm so glad I read it. Next, Conjuration, a random country, and my random country was Eswatini. And I read A Beautiful Place to Die by Malla Nunn, which was my planned book. So that's, I've read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's of the 5 books I've told you about so far. This is the second where I've read the one I said I was going to. And this is set in South Africa, just as apartheid is starting. It is brutal, but it does have beautiful scenery. So it's just like in this beautiful place, we've got all these horrible racist people committing horribly racially motivated murder, and the only person who can kind of go between those is the cop. So he's in this really weird position, and it kind of explores that somewhat. So it's a really great book. I'm really glad I read it. Demonology, A Missing Person. I read As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson, which was also my planned book. I wasn't quite sure, but it just has to be with a missing person. So in this book, it's quite clear that someone's stalking Pip, our protagonist. And she keeps getting letters saying, who's going to look for you when you've gone missing? So Pip, this is the third in a trilogy, and in the first 2 books, Pip has a true crime podcast, and she's the detective. But she's quite clear that actually she isn't sure that anyone will look for her. And then she does get kidnapped, and then it's kind of like what happens from there. And it was so good. Proper scary as well, but really good. My favourite of the 3. I definitely recommend reading, especially if you read the second and you weren't sure. I definitely recommend it. Elemental Studies, Fruit on the Cover. And I planned Southern Myths by Amy Boyles, and I read Southern Myths by Amy Boyles. And again, this was one which could have gone in several different other categories. But this is part of the Sweet Tea Mysteries, in which there's a lovely family all being really sweet. They're kind of like lightly woven plots of just really lovely people having a great time together. And it's urban fantasy with a mystery element. In this one, there's a dragon, and yeah, it's just a lot of fun and a lot of sweet tea. Gets drunk usually with lemon, which is why there was a fruit on the cover, because there was a drink with a sliced lemon. Okay, Spells and Incantations, World from Last Book title. So my last book that I'd read at the time that I watched the video, and therefore the book I chose, was Space Odysseys. And the book I chose to read was Nigerians in Space by Deji, Bryce, Olukotun. And that was also what I did read. And I was surprised by this book because I thought it was going to be sci-fi, and it was kind of a crime thriller. But someone is trying to get all the Nigerians back from the brain drain, and they're calling it brain gain. So they're getting all these like scientists back from all over the world to kind of come back to Nigeria and put together a space program. And then there's a coup, and the government doesn't like it, and there's a whole lot of abalone in South Africa, which was a nice little detour that I really appreciated, that kind of marine biology thrown in. But it really wasn't the most of it. Most of it was about crime, and people keep getting murdered, and the people we're following don't know why or what's going on or how not to be murdered. So yeah, it was really good, but it was a crime thriller and not really a sci-fi. Artificery, the title length at the time when I saw the video, so it was 11:30ish, so I went with 11 letters, and I chose Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is a novel in verse about someone whose brother has been shot, and he spends most of the book in the elevator down to go and take his revenge. It's magical realism rather than fantasy or sci-fi, but it is a lot of I'm trying to describe it without giving any spoilers. It's a grim, dark, magical realist poetic novel about perpetuating systems of violence and family. The next was Inscription. Read the first sentence of 3 books and pick one, which I did in the video when I set up the TBR. And that was The Darkening by Sunya is what I chose. And this is a romantasy about the crown and the going against the crown, and then there's like a barrier, and should you go over the barrier, you shouldn't go through the barrier, but maybe you should go through the barrier. And it was kind of fairly standard, like it had a lot of the very standard romantic tropes, and it was well read. I found it quite well written. I found it quite gripping, but I found it difficult to come and pick up and say, oh, you did this and this, because it was, yeah. Lure, musical term entitled Sing Me to Sleep by Gabby Burton. This is a siren who's a serial killer, and she gets put in charge of working out who the serial killer is. So it's kind of a really nice conceit, and it was really well done. And again, it's romantasy. Psionics and Divination, a book with witches or the occult. And I put In the Company of Witches by Aurelie Wallace, and I just wasn't feeling it. So I did not, in fact, read that. I read A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher, which is a Goose Girl retelling. Dark, creepy, there's a wicked mother, there's like all the good stuff. I'm amazed they haven't really turned this into a Disney yet. But yeah, it was T. Kingfisher doing what T. Kingfisher does best, really, of taking a fairy tale and bringing out the positive influences, and good will prevail, and kind of bringing out, and also not being afraid of the dark elements, which are always in fairy tales. Restoration, a book with a 4+ star rating. This is not, I gave it a 4+ star rating, this is an average on Goodreads. And I'd intended to read Installment Immortality by Shauna Maguire, which had got that because of people reading the Ark, but I haven't managed to get my hands on it yet. So I read The Book of Koli by M.R. Carey. This is a post-apocalyptic eco-fiction in which someone tries to claim a piece of tech that still works and gets exiled because of it, and goes on a jolly through the post-apocalyptic England, and with someone he knew who was a travelling like bit of everything, like doctor and stuff. And then there's shenanigans. There was less of the eco-fiction element than I was expecting, and I think I found that a bit disappointing, and more of the quest. It reminded me of the John Christopher Burning Lands books, so if you like those, you'll probably like it. And last but not least, Shapeshifting, a dragon in the title, cover or story. And again, I had When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. But when the Hugo nominations came out and I saw that So Let Them Burn by Kamilah Cole was on them, and I knew I had it there, I picked up that instead. And this is a fantasy this is a post-war, in which one side had dragons and the other didn't. And it's someone who, from the non-dragon side, gets chosen by a dragon to be their rider. And then it's kind of, again, shenanigans, trying to work out what's good and what's bad, and how to make your way to peace when you've got this uncomfortable relationship where one side is much, much stronger, but there wasn't really a win. And it's set in a sort of fantasy Jamaica, with that kind of post-colonial settling down. And I actually really loved it, and it was really interesting and thoughtful, and so much depth. So you could read it as just like, oh, it's a cool romance, no, so it's cool fantasy with dragons, or you could read it in that kind of much deeper, twistier post-colonial way, or preferably both. So definitely would recommend that. Okay, so I will be back with you soon. I've no idea what I'm going to be talking about, and just have a good week and I'll see you soon. Bye.